everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy 5 podcast brought to you by Sideline Sports Network. I'm your host, JT. First off, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that I haven't made a show for the past 2 weeks. I'm sure you all have been devastated about it, but we're back. We're going to be talking Week 7 today, and I'd like to apologize about that. Hopefully, we're going to be able to keep a show weekly going forward. Life's just been a little bit hectic these past couple weeks, but here we are. Today, we're going to be talking injuries, we're going to be talking waiver wire pickups, and we're going to be talking rookie rankings. Same 3 segments we've been doing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll right into injuries. Today, we're going to be talking a couple guys who are going to be coming back from an injury. So shake things up from your conventional injury report. So without further ado, first up, we've got James Conner. He's not going to be one of those guys coming back. He's got a rib injury. He's listed as questionable against the Saints tonight, but I certainly don't expect him to play. The official injury report for the game hasn't come out yet. Everybody's going to be looking at that first thing. So by the time you're seeing this, I'm sure it's going to be out. But take my word for it. Hopefully he was ruled out. If not, that's going to be my first goof up. Feel free to comment if I am wrong or if I'm right. Give me props. Next up, Darren Waller. He's most likely going to be out on Sunday against the Texans. He's got a hamstring injury. Really not too much to add to that. He's just got a hamstring injury. I don't believe he's been ruled out completely, but I think he said himself that he's not planning on playing this Sunday. So, something to take for granted. Next up, we've got the entire Saints receiving corps. Also not your conventional play for an injury report, but all the following guys are going to be out tonight against the Cardinals. Jarvis Landry, Michael Thomas, and their starting tight end, Adam Troutman. So that's going to make it a tough game against the Cardinals. If there's one guy who's able to shoulder that load, it's going to be Alvin Kamara. So, I trust him to do that tonight. So that's going to be a guy to watch out for to have another breakout performance. Next up, as I said, Dak Prescott. He's coming back from that thumb injury that he suffered in Week 1. It's going to be interesting to see how he returns. Word on the street is he's not going to be wearing a brace or anything on his hand. So, he could come back looking like the same old Dak Prescott or anything else could happen. Literally, the spectrum is wide with this one. And lastly, we've got Mac Jones. He's also going to be potentially coming back from that ankle injury he had. He's optimistic that he will have progressed enough through that ankle injury to be able to go on Monday night. However, with Bailey Zappi performing so well in his absence, Bill Belichick basically has another Tom Brady situation on his hands. Bailey Zappi could be the Tom Brady rising up through the ranks right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Patriots quarterback situation pans out over the next couple weeks. So that's going to do it for injuries today. We're going to move straight into waiver wire pickups next. It's worth noting here, there's not that much excitement this week on the wire. I'm going to touch on a couple guys that definitely need scooped up if they're still available in your league. And then I'm going to mention 3 of my favorite stash options. So first up, we've got Kenneth Walker III for the Vikings, or sorry, not for the Vikings, for the Seahawks. Rashad Penny's out for the season with the fractured fibula, as we've all seen. In the past 2 games, Kenneth Walker has averaged 92.5 yards and a score. So I'm wording that poorly. He's got 2 scores in the last 2 weeks, and he's averaged 92.5 yards. With the guaranteed uptick in touches to continue, he's got plenty of opportunity to bring you solid fantasy points, especially if the Seahawks can find themselves in the red zone. Next up, Brian Robinson. I was shocked to see, actually, that he's still available in around half of leagues. So if he's still available in your league, definitely scoop him up. He's the clear back right now in Washington as far as running backs go. Antonio Gibson has had quite the forgettable year. Jerome McKissick's actually the running back number 2 on the roster list. So on the fantasy projections list, I should say, rather than roster. So Antonio Gibson's a no-go. Brian Robinson's going to be your guy. He's you can't understate the grit that comes with playing NFL football merely weeks after being shot twice. So, he's definitely a guy that you've got to pick up just for the dog factor that he has. So next up, I've got Jahan Dotson, also with the Commanders. He's been out the last 2 weeks with a hamstring injury, and apparently he tweaked it again today in practice, so something to keep your eye on. But when he returns, he's fit to put up reliable numbers, especially for a rookie. And after an explosive start to the year, he actually managed to become available in half of all the leagues with this injury that's come up, and he's certainly worth a pickup if your league is one of those where he is available. So another guy to keep your eye on. Next up, D'Onta Foreman. You got to keep an eye on the entire Panthers offense basically right now. It's kind of falling apart. Baker's questionable going into this week. But apparently they're softly or like quietly trying to shop Christian McCaffrey. So if that were to take place, D'Onta Foreman is in a prime position to take over in the lead rushing role with a struggling offense, as I said, who often turns to the run when their passing runs flat, which it does often. Shout out Baker Mayfield. Lastly, for the waiver wire, we've got my favorite guy today, Kyren Williams for the Rams. He's currently on the IR with a high ankle sprain that he suffered in the opener, but he should be back to practice in a couple weeks, and he's right now available in about 90% of leagues, and this is why I'm talking about him. If I can promise you one thing, it's that number is just going to drop every week for the next month, especially with the total lack of trust that the Rams have in Cam Akers right now. Um, when Sean McVay likes a quarterback or a running back, he finds him the ball, and he really likes Kyren Williams. And with Cam Akers kind of falling apart, Kyren Williams is going to take in that spot like the moment he comes back. So I think you should scoop him up now if you don't find yourself being the 10% of leagues that he's not already scooped up, then you're just out of luck. Next up, we're going to hop right into the rookie rankings. So we've got some movement here. A lot of the same guys that I've got. My number one's gonna shock a few people, but it's the way I see it. So first up, we've got Garrett Wilson with the Jets. He's had low production the past 3 weeks, which has caused him to slip down in the rankings for a few reasons. Mainly, their running game is on absolute fire. More on that to come soon. Also, he and Zach Wilson are surely, just still working out some kinks as Zach Wilson comes back. From the field general type game plan that Joe Flacco is running for a few weeks. And lastly, to give the guy some credit, defenses are definitely respecting Garrett Wilson's athleticism, and they're playing him in close coverage very often. Next up, we've got Drake London with the Falcons. The Falcons really need to continue or to start utilizing him better. He's a really, really confusing player to read in this offense. He could possibly have the best raw talent in this rookie class. But as of last week, he was, and that shows up in sometimes with the Falcons. As of last week, he was third in the league with target share, over 35% of the targets. Yet at that time, he was currently 66th in total routes run at about 105. So he struggled to get going, getting 40 or less yards in each of his last 3 games. So, the tide could turn for him. He could really turn the season around and still put himself into a good position for rookie of the year. But he's kind of slipping right now. Next up, Chris Olave. A lot of people fall asleep on Chris Olave, but he scored in the last 2 games before his concussion came up, which despite all the questions in the Saints quarterback room, he's been able to find the end zone the past 2 games before his concussion. And he's showing himself as a reliable floor option. He averages over 15 fantasy points in every game that he plays, with the lowest score being 9.5. Hey, co-host Luna just fell down. With the co-host, we've got co-host Luna here. You want to say hi to the fans? Hello, how we doing? Anyway, with Chris Olave, he's averaged 15 points in all of his games so far. His lowest score being 9.1 points in week 1. So if he plays tonight, he's a great start. I think he's listed as questionable. But with all those other guys that I said, Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry and Troutman being out, Chris Olave is probably going to have to step up. Excuse me, Luna. I'm trying to wrap up the show here. Next up, we've got Breece Hall. Absolute unit. This guy is, who would have thought that, I would have 2 Jets in a top 5 list anywhere, but, the NFL is a crazy place. In the last 2 games, he's got 38 rushes and 213 yards, and he just continues to build on his previous performances. So these are all of his fantasy stats over the entire season. 10.1, 13, 15.2, 15.8, 27.7, and 20.1. So despite last week he went down to earth a little bit and got a mere 20 points, he's gone up in every single week besides that. So he's a fantastic guy, and he really shot up my leaderboards. I think he's the only guy actually who I didn't have on my leaderboard as far as rookies go in the last podcast. So big shout out to Breece Hall. He's looking like he's on an absolute warpath, and he's probably just going to keep it going. So really got to watch out for this Jets offense this year. But last but not least, we've got Dameon Pierce with the Houston Texans. I have him as my favorite guy. He's just so awesome to watch. I think one of the reasons I might like him is because he's currently second in the league in broken tackles behind Nick Chubb, which is obviously my favorite running back, being from Cleveland. And you can see a lot of similarities with Chubb in his running style. Right now, Dameon Pierce is averaging 95 yards a game. And that I shouldn't say right now. That's since he took over the majority of the touches from Rex Burkhead in week 2. He's also accounting for the third best usage rate for running backs. So you really can't pass that up. He had the 175-yard run a couple weeks ago, and he just continues to just dominate on the broken tackles area. I've got one stat I'm going to pull up here real quick. He over the last 2 weeks, he has 17 missed tackles. The rookie running back class this year is absolutely insane. Breece Hall has 10 missed tackles over the last 2 weeks. Kenneth Walker has 14 missed tackles over the last 2 weeks, and Dameon Pierce is leading the absolute league with 17. So he's a dog, and you can't pass him up. I'm not saying you're going to find him in a league. I highly doubt you are. But if you have him and you've been still wary to start him, he needs to be in your starting lineup, and there's no two ways about it. So, with that said, that's going to go ahead and do it for the Fantasy 5 podcast for this week. Best of luck to everybody putting in their bets and stuff. As you can see, I'm not doing the bet slip this week. I'm doing Sober October when it comes to sports betting because I'm a degenerate loser. So, we're going to go ahead and start things back up in November on a lighter note. But with that said, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week. Best of luck with all your fantasy games this week.